This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 121, Sharing in the Spoils of Your Hard Work.
Welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Now, Marxists know, of course, of the struggle between the workers and the capitalists, even if it probably should be the struggle between the workers and the financiers. So does that mean now is the time for workers to get a share in the companies that they work for? Many companies already offer this, of course, but should it be compulsory? That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast. During the Labour Party conference a few weeks ago now, the UK Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell unveiled a plan that would see companies with 250 or more people working for it having to set up ownership funds, in effect ensuring all workers had a shareholding in the company. The longer they worked, the more shares they would have. And it follows a report by the Institute for Public Policy Research that said the shareholder-driven model of capitalism is outmoded, they reckon. So the plan is companies would be required to transfer 1% of equity annually into an inclusive ownership fund until it was 10% of the total. The workers in the company would then own that 10%. They would have the same voting rights as shareholders and the rights to dividends. The only thing is they couldn't sell or trade those shares, presumably until they left the company. So, Steve, what is John McDonnell trying to do here? It sounds like he's trying, in a way, perhaps this is a new way of replacing the power of the unions, isn't it, with the power of ownership?
Well, in fact, this is an attempt to turn capitalism into a total socialist economy. Totally
it's
socialism.
Disgusting, isn't it?
Just like that terrible socialism called West Germany.
Yeah. and only 10% socialist anyway. There is still 90% capitalist.
90% capitalist. Yeah. So this is the problem with this. It's going to be interpreted. I can just see how the press is going to swing it, particularly the UK media, turning us into a socialist republic of the UK. It is in fact the system that has existed in Germany since the it may have been pre-war, but it's certainly the post-war period that German companies had a workers' board, and I think the term for it was Aufsichtsrat. I'm obviously mispronouncing it, but that's roughly what the German word is.
And their rights to being on that board was what they had. They actually did have share ownership, or were they just on the board?
I'm not sure about the share ownership. I think there was the workers had a right to representation, as did the customers on companies over a certain size. And the idea was you wanted the companies to be reflecting not just the shareholders, but the overall. Just because the shareholders are important, obviously, not only the shareholders, but the interests of the other stakeholders in the company, and the obvious stakeholders in a company, the people who supply to it, the people who buy from it, and the people who work for it. And to some extent, the representation was made for all of them. And there was this separate board, which involved, and I think it still exists, which involves the workers and the management together on what's called an Aufsichtsrat. So it's a common component.
Right, but you're wrong about the press branding this as socialism, because this was a few weeks ago now, and the press seems to have just totally ignored it. I mean, John McDonnell made a key part of his speech at the Labour Party conference, but everyone just seems to, it was important to him, but not important to anybody else, it seems.
Well, maybe it's not as important as Brexit, which is the only thing the UK press seems to discuss. That might be where it fell through the cracks. But when it gets close to the election, out it will come. But it is a way of including the interests of all the stakeholders in a corporation in making its decisions. And I think I'd happily bet with anybody that the UK system has worked less well than the German system.
Yeah.
Even leaving the euro out of it, leaving the euro and the eurozone, everything else, the German way of building a corporation has been far more successful than the UK, and it is partly because it includes all its stakeholders to some extent. And what McDonnell is doing here is saying, okay, let's include the workers to some degree.
Yeah, but don't we want to keep workers in their place? I mean, giving them the voting rights, aren't they going to make decisions which are not necessarily the right decision? I mean, the fact that they're working on the factory floor doesn't mean they're able to. I mean, you can tell I'm being devil's advocate here, of course. At least I hope you can. But the fact they're working on the factory floor, the devil's floor, on the factory floor means that they don't know. It doesn't mean they know how to run a company.
Yeah, but often the people running the company don't know what happens on the factory floor either, so you need a bit of feedback between the two. And this, again, is another interesting area in the development of industrial strategies over time, because that was the attitude of Deming. Now, I can't think of Deming's first name, but he was industrial planner in the USA who was involved in a large amount of the rapid shifting of the American from a peace economy to a war economy after the Japanese attack. And of course, in a very, very short time, the whole American industry shifted over a dramatic level of production. And he then thought that would be taken as a sensible policy in the future to industrialize the America after the Second World War. And in fact, the Americans basically said, "Oh, bugger it, we won the war. Who cares what Deming did at that stage? Let's forget about it." And he was neglected in America as they went to Japan. And that's where just-in-time manufacturing began.
Right.
And one of the essential things about just-in-time manufacturing was every worker on the production floor could stop at the production line. And the idea was not, they're going to ruin the whole thing. That particular worker would know whether their part of the process is working properly or not. And so when the plant was first built, off goes the production line. If there's an error, the worker can stop it. The management comes down. What's not working properly? Here's the point. Let's fix this piece. And over time, the production line started slowly, stops and starts and all that sort of jazz, but ultimately the problems were ironed out. So you need feedback. You have to involve you can't have this, you can't reproduce the class struggle attitude that seems to dominate British politics within a company and expect the company to work well. Once you're working inside the company, you want to have that feedback. You want to have the workers involved. And that is something which is missing from the current UK system.
And I guess if you get to the stage where every business has 10% of the shareholding in that business is owned by the people working in that business, then that provides a new opportunity for unions, doesn't it? Perhaps it reinvents the union because all of a sudden they are almost like representing that 10% of shareholders. It makes sense that you say, yes, let's get together and have some sort of representation on our board so our 10% counts.
Yeah, and then what you then get is workers who are far less likely to go on strike if part of their income flow comes from the company itself. Yeah. So it's trying to build a level of cooperation inside the company itself, which companies need. You're not going to be successful having class conflict reproduced inside your firm. You want to have, class conflict outside perhaps, but inside the firm, make sure everybody works together. You have two approaches, two extremes. One is the total command economy. Workers do what they're told and shut up. That works well if the company is well designed. Now, if it's not, you get a potential of not just sabotage, which is the most obvious thing that can go wrong, but, this thing doesn't work. Who gives a shit? So I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to tell this particular part of the production line doesn't work properly. They can live with it, and you get maintaining bad quality rather than improving quality over time. Is
there a danger, though, that if companies, for all the wrong reasons as far as the company is concerned, but isn't there a danger that this may be their mentality? If this is foisted on us by a Labour government, that they see it as a disincentive to employ more people because they're going to have to divvy up more of the company to more people. So they look at ways of employing people less and looking at more mechanization or outsourcing and doing that sort of thing.
No, that's potential, but that's why I think it's quite I haven't seen the plan in the same detail you have, but the idea of starting at 1% of ownership and reaching a ceiling of 10 over time, it's not taking away the silverware. So it's still saying, in some ways, it's admitting just how bad the performance of British manufacturing has been and saying, let's slowly get to the stage where there's cooperation within the corporation rather than conflict. Let's copy what the Germans have done, but get there gradually. And this is one thing which is an outsider to the UK. One thing I like about the UK is the extent to which people are willing to entertain ideas they don't necessarily agree with. That's something which I didn't see much in the Australian political scene. But the level of class conflict this place still has, and this ruling class, middle class, working class divide, which is still here, is part of the reason why it's failed as an industrial country compared to Germany. It's about bloody time the British woke up to themselves.
Yeah, well, even worse than that is the way that the working class kowtows to the upper class. The idea that Jacob Rees-Mogg would be given any credence whatsoever by anybody, but let alone by the working class, and yet a lot of people seem to think, this is just the sort of character we need because we need to feel the pain to get ahead. That seems to be part of the British mentality, which I don't get either.
So it is a cultural thing, and cultural change takes time. And And clearly, if you think about what Deming did with Japan, Japan began with a very homogenous culture, very homogenous ethnic background, and a respect for the feudal system, and very rapid transition of that to capitalism back with the Meiji Restoration back in 1868. So there was a tendency to say, let's do what we are told to do, but the Deming thing came and gave a feedback and say, let's listen to the workers as well, not all one way. And what you got out of that is a fairly significant transformation of Japan over time. It's still a very hierarchical society, but the hierarchy listens to those below. And again, in terms of industrial success, I'd take Japan any day over the UK. And then they think about the similarities. Both island states off a major continent. So the UK has to wake up to itself. And this is, I think, in some ways, McDonnell's proposal is an extremely good way of saying, let's take some good ideas from elsewhere in the world and transfer them to the UK and try to build cooperation inside the corporation so corporations can succeed compared to others, rather than just reproducing the English class conflict on the production line inside the factory.
But you know what? Cooperatives have been part of the British industrial scene for quite a long time. In fact, I read somewhere that employee-owned businesses account for 4% of GDP here. And you can look at one company, look at John Lewis, a $10 billion company, which is entirely owned by people who work for it. You cannot buy shares in John Lewis. So their annual report doesn't mention dividends. They call it partnership bonus. And it all goes back to the workers. So there's a huge example of a cooperative, and it's quite a refreshing read looking at the annual report, because they're looking about how it's all being ploughed back into the company, and what isn't ploughed back into the company is paid as dividends to people who work there. So 100% of the company works like that. And
actually, I'm having shopped there. I'm quite happy that it exists, because I like the range and I like the service and I like so it actually can work effectively. That's the extreme, which would start raising the hackles of the ruling class, and 100% hand over to the workers. Yeah. But it shows that sort of thing can function, and it's getting a degree of commitment inside the firm that you can't get if you go the total American extreme, where the irony about American capitalism, it's all about freedom of enterprise, freedom of expression at the ideological level. Inside the company, it's total line, MF, if you know what MF stands for. And the workers get told what to do, and it's that also can be an effective model, but it's as even Paul Samuelson once said, American capitalism characterized by a rampant capitalist class and a cowed working class. And,
which is what John Lewis, the man behind John Lewis, John Spedden Lewis, industrial democracy, he called it. He said, partners should share profit, knowledge and power. It was a better way of doing business, and that's why he set up John Lewis. And, it's still around today, and Waitrose is all part of that as well. So, it's a growing group and a big part of the retail scene here in the UK. So if they're doing quite well, they go good and bad days. I suspect, actually, if you're having a bad time, you're probably better to ride the wave or the downside of the wave, because you can say that people who are working there, look, your wages aren't going to go up. You're not going to get any dividends on your shareholding. But they're part of the business. They'd be happy to feel the pain if they know they're going to ride the wave again.
Yeah, and a similar thing applies in Spain with what's called Mondragon. If you've seen the Mondragon experience, have you ever taken a look at that?
No.
So if you look at what the Mondragon thing did, it was initially trying to revive a depressed area of Spanish economies, and it has actually ended up being on various times the fastest growing region of the global economy, and it's still, growing quite successfully. It began in 1956. And it now has about 75,000 employees starting from one or two way back. It's the 10th largest Spanish company.
So why?
And the leading business guy in the basket. So this can work.
So given that it can work, and clearly there's so much evidence around the world, it's a question of why John McDonnell would feel that he has to. I mean, he obviously has to, but it's a question of why he has to sort of say that this becomes a compulsory requirement. Why wouldn't companies just say, this makes sense, we're going to do this?
Again, it's that the class conflict we have outside a company gets reproduced inside if you don't think wisely enough about it. And they say, we want to hang on to my capitalist share and not give any to the workers. you're talking that as an ideological thing, you then come to your own company and reproduce that internally. It is not a good idea. It is better to say, let's involve my workers in the firm so that they actually work harder for me. And inside the company, we get cooperation and improve the processes, and they get a bit of a benefit out of it as well.
So why wouldn't companies be doing that with them? If a company doesn't do that, then they get beaten by competitors who do it. If it is so much more efficient, why wouldn't we just be seeing that being the natural order of things? If it works.
Well, we ask in that sense of the growth of the Mondragon relative to the rest of the world. We have seen that happen. And John Lewis is a classic example happening in retail. But the evolution doesn't work that rapidly, even in capitalism. The evolutionary argument is what you're putting there. There's plenty of resistance to it, and even though you are getting these parts growing, Mondragon growing doesn't mean Mondragon's going to get together somebody who can invent a rival to Elon Musk's SpaceX. So it isn't the only factor involved, but it shows that the testing point is these little things have worked. Let's try to generalize it to some extent. And certainly with the pathetic state of the UK manufacturing, something has to be done to shift the culture. And I think that's what John McDonnell's idea sounds like to me.
Right. But you have just given, just in that last couple of sentences, an argument where it might not work, where you've got somebody who's got a great idea and they just have to carry the company with them. And if
that's another thing. Yeah, it isn't necessarily going to work for innovation. Okay, that's one point I can concede on. Yeah.
That's pretty important, isn't it?
It's very important, and because you have to get enough finance to be able to do this on a large scale. So looking at Mondragon, for example, its current total revenue is €12 billion a year. That's you don't sneeze at that. That's a substantial part of the Spanish economy. Whether it could actually get the finance needed to take on something as big as, say, a semiconductor plant or something of that nature, I don't think it could. So the idea can grow within the boundaries of small business to some extent, but to make that transition to large business, the capital requirements might be such that it can't make that transition.
So isn't this really almost sort of like old-fashioned thinking then, in that it could work very well in manufacturing or very labor-intensive industries like retail, in the case of John Lewis. It works well there because labor is a significant part of of all your operations. But that's it. For innovative, svelte, highly adaptive companies, it could be something that weighs them down.
No, I think even in those cases, if you look what happens in Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley, a major part of your recruitment campaign in a Silicon Valley startup is handing over shares in the company to initial staff. And that's what, if you've seen the movie about Jobs.
That's because they haven't got any money. They say, we'll give you shares because we haven't got any capital. So we'll give you a promise.
You transit to the stage where you keep on doing it after you get to the stage of being a profitable enterprise. So I think it's very feasible, but it is on its own, it's not a panacea. And there may be some sectors where it works better than others. The retail, I think, is one clearly where it's likely to happen because, boy, do you get good service when the staff own the company they're selling out of. That's the advantage of a small business over a large one, and this lets it transit from the small business scale to the large scale, as John Lewis has done. So I think this is put it this way, there's something needs to change in the culture of UK industry to enable it to stop losing. But I think this is one thing that could do it.
Right. But there's less examples of cooperatives in Australia where, Australia would say, oh, well, we don't have that class divide, but it's not happening there either.
Well, to say Australia has another class divide is Australian bullshit. As I think both.
Well, actually,
the old say, what's a leprechaun?
Don't know.
He's an Australian with the shit beaten out of him.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, there is a class divide. It's wealth rather than any inheritance.
We have the so-called mobility, but boy, in terms of who makes the power decisions, it's still very much a class system.
So what would be the arguments against this then? So if you've got a load of shares, and I guess you'd have to if you're going to do it 1% per year until you've got 10% of the total, then you're not going to be able to sell shares. You're going to have to issue new shares.
Yeah, that's right.
You
could actually sell. You could be buying, and you'd be buying. Part of. Well, the share we know share buybacks are a huge part of what's happening.
So exactly.
Right
exactly. That's right. So if the company's got the ability to do that, then if they've got the resources or the cash to do that, then they could do it as part of a share back. But otherwise, it would have to be a share issuance. So that affects the value of the existing shares, doesn't it? I mean, when companies buy back shares, there's always the danger that it devalues what shares are left.
Oh, they increase the value of the shares. That's the whole idea of a buyback, is to drive up the value.
Sorry, Other way around. Exactly, you're right.
If you're buying them and transferring to somebody else, you're not getting the inflating the value of the share buyback effect, and you are transferring the ownership. So what you'd have to say is the decline, the watering down of the percentage ownership of the current owners has to be more than compensated by increase in the performance of the corporation overall. And that's a
big sell. That's a big sell to existing shares.
That's a big sell. But given the state of UK manufacturing, something has to sell.
So that could be a reason why you almost have to enforce it, wouldn't it? Because if a company said, well, this sounds like a pretty good idea, what we're going to do is we're going to do this. We're going to, over the next 10 years, we're going to give 10% of our share register to people who work for the company. We're going to issue more shares to enable that. And then people are going to go, hang on a sec, that's 110% of the shares. So our shares are worth less now. We're not going to support this motion. So it would never.
Yeah,
so there would be shareholder involved. So it would be blocked. So the only way for it to happen actually is going, as you say, is going to be for it to be enforced.
And then it would be seen as this terrible Labor government after 2022 enforcing socialism on the rest of this democratic capitalist economy called the UK. So I can see there are lots and lots of political fluff over it, but I think fundamentally is an idea of how to manage a company and how to improve feedback within the company so you get cooperation where you want it. It's a good idea.
Yeah, but it is a tough sell for John McDonnell if he pushes ahead with this, because not only are shareholders going to be upset, but then everyone's going to be told, yes, but your retirement funds as well, all these shares are going down because of this extra share issuance. In effect, if every company is having to issue 10% extra shares, then that is devaluing all shares. That's devaluing your retirement funds. The man in the street, the worker is getting hit by this.
Hey, you and I could get jobs as leader writers for The Sun there and then.
We could, couldn't we? I've already worked it out. So I wonder whether it means this would never happen. Nice idea, but in reality, too politically difficult in this sort of environment where we seem to be going the other way.
Quite possibly. I mean, even if you look at the 5-year term that a typical government has in the UK, that fixed 5-year term, you'd only get halfway before they get thrown out by the Tories and they kick it out again. Yeah. So it's quite possible it would be rejected in that way. It may be the sort of thing where you need, as well as making it a political campaign, to also say, here's an opt-in possibility. And if you opt in, then you just set that up and you can keep on doing it yourselves. Again, one thing I fear is getting a bureaucracy telling you how to go about doing it, which is never one of my favourite activities. But to provide a template for it and say, this is a fast way to change your structure, it might be adopted even after it becomes politically a hot potato.
Yeah, but the difficulty of doing it yourself, as we just said, is the fact that it's going to in the short term anyway, it's going to impact shareholder value, and no one's going to buy that. That's the big problem with it, isn't it? So
I think so.
But I mean, it does get over short termism as well, doesn't it? I mean, one of the big problems for companies is that the board and particularly the CEO have got very much a short term vision, because they're only the CEO is only there for 4 or 8 years. The workers are potentially there all their lives, and so they've got more of a vested interest in the decisions being made having a longer term outlook.
Absolutely. And that's, again, one reason that things like Mondragon work, because you are committed to it indefinitely. Whereas if the whole hassle about the shareholder value movement has been that it's all about what's happened to the 3-month performance of the shares. And that's where the whole idea of leverage buyouts have come from, the whole vulture funds. And that's been destructive, not just of the culture, but destructive of the actual corporations themselves on occasions. The way that General Electric was pulled apart by that whole process is a classic example. So, yeah, we have to getting away from this nonsense idea that the shareholder value is the right way to go about it. That is another economics textbook's idea. And of course, as you know, almost by definition, anything in the economics textbook is going to be wrong.
If ownership went from 10% being owned by the workers to say 50%, so it was half owned by workers and half owned by people from outside the business, speculators, then could that then sort of help to stop the wild fluctuations that we see in the share market? Because a lot of it would be
very much doubted, and I don't think you'd get past the 10% level anyway, mate. Let's be politically realistic about this. I think it's a useful model for what we're going to need.
John Lewis is 100%. Why wouldn't we get to 50%?
He started at 100%, and he was committed to it.
Yeah.
That's an ideological starting point. If you even, pardon me, exactly what you've said. I'm writing the next leader for the Sun here, and 10%, it's just a slow creep. They'll start at 10, but it'll get to 100. So I'm sorry, you've just written the second leader for the Sun.
All right. Okay. Well, John McDonnell, perhaps on the right track. Chance of it happening in the UK. Well, who knows? Maybe its time is right. Maybe once we're over Brexit and people realise that their reason for dissatisfaction is perhaps less to do with the EU and more to do with the way capitalism works in its current form, less to do with European bureaucrats, maybe people will be looking for other ideas, and maybe John McDonnell's got a good one here.
That's actually what I think is the right way to look at this. And my exposure to the office rat movement, by the way, came from reading a book as a student assignment back in my undergraduate years by a guy called Andrew Schonfeld, and it was called something like just the title Capitalism. But he went through about 15 countries and the variations of the nature of capitalism in each of those countries. And one of them was the German system with the office rat and a degree of collectivism within the firm. And that was part of what he said is the reason for the success of German industry. I was reading back in 1972, and I think that still stands strong today.
And I guess, it is a bit of government control, but on the other side, maybe the government could have less control in other ways if you did have this representation, because you wouldn't need to look at minimum wage and stuff like that maybe quite so much, because the workers would be there saying, well, no, we're not going to work for any less, and we've got a significant shareholding, we can and you've got to keep us happy.
And that's actually what tends to happen. I think in some sense the German government is less intrusive into its corporations than it would be without the office right system.
Yeah. Well, there are. You beauty, John McDonnell. We're behind you on this one. Thank you, Steve. We'll catch you again very soon.
Okay.
Well, will it happen? I think John McDonnell has written it into the Labour manifesto. All they've got to do is win government. That shouldn't be too tricky, should it? I wouldn't have thought so at the next election, whenever that might be. That's it for the Debunking Economics podcast for this time. I'm Phil Dobbie with Professor Steve Keen. Back again soon. Thanks for listening.